Orson Welles is cited as having said that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations. In the process of creating a work of art, it's easy to wish for more. More time, more resources, more inspiration. But so often, it's actually due to constraints that the greatest works come to fruition. With the world of console gaming now in its 8th generation, much is now possible that only a few decades ago might have been entirely unfathomable. Particle, light, and camera effects create worlds that at first glance might be confused with real life. Motion capture technology breathes life into digital characters whose emotions would once have been conveyed to the player via pixelated sprite animation. So is it purely a consequence of nostalgia that so many games from generations past are still held in such high regard today? An artistic style, when distinct enough, can transcend even the technical limitations of its time. Kirby's Adventure on the Nintendo Entertainment System exemplifies the notion that limitations didn't merely serve to inhibit it. They actually resulted in a style that informed the aesthetic of its successors for years to come. Released in 1993 as a sequel to Kirby's Dream Land, Kirby's Adventure came out at a time when the NES was in its waning years, and the Super Nintendo era was already well underway. Developer HAL Laboratory was able to leverage their extensive knowledge of working with the NES from previous titles like Adventures of Lolo and Mother to make a game that truly pushed the limits of the console. So much so that the cartridge for Kirby's Adventure would become the single largest NES game to be released in North America, a then massive 6 megabits. The Nintendo's color palette was comprised of a mere 54 colors, and in most situations, a sprite or tile could only possess 3 colors at a time. These restrictions are a large contributing factor to why most NES-era art is immediately recognizable, even to the untrained eye. A workaround often employed by artists of the time was a process called dithering, in which 2 colors were blended together with a checkerboard-like pattern to create the illusion of a smoother gradient of color. Despite this commonly used trick, the artists at HAL Laboratory instead opted to favor a very flat, minimalistic style in Kirby's Adventure. While in some NES games a flat style only served to deflate the visual aesthetic, Kirby was able to overcome this pitfall due to the sheer variety of its tile artwork. Every corner of the game is chock full of creative uses of art assets, not only to create visual interest, but to create obstacles and to creatively guide the player toward hidden collectibles and secret areas. Originally created by Masahiro Sakurai, Kirby is beloved for his optimism, determination, and naivete. Due to his mute nature, it would have been easy to relegate his identity to the opening pages of the instruction booklet, a common tactic used by games that otherwise lacked a narrative. Through expert use of animation, however, HAL Laboratory was able to inject an unparalleled level of charm into their game's protagonist. Kirby's personality seeps from every action he performs. When idle, he sleepily blinks his eyes while awaiting the player's next command. When walking, he waddles awkwardly with his arms swinging wide. Where most other games of the time had a single sprite jumping animation, Kirby had far more. First, the ascent. Then, at the apex of his jump, he does a somersault. As he descends, he sticks out his feet and braces for impact. Finally, the landing. With a standard jump, he compresses briefly. If he falls from too high, though, Kirby hits his head on the ground. If you've been counting, that's 4 different phases to every single jump, one of which varies depending upon the context. With the simple one-button input from the player, so much is communicated about Kirby as a character. He's playful, his body's pliable, sometimes he's overly ambitious, but most importantly, he's resilient. The game's sense of mischief isn't just confined to Kirby's jumping sequence either. Whether he's sliding down a slope, flapping his tiny arms while floating like a balloon, or spitting water at enemies as an underwater attack, the love crafted into his animation is clear. Furthermore, this playfulness extends into the art of the game world itself. Each screen's atmosphere is highly frenetic. In opposition to the static backgrounds of many other games, here they're animated. Clouds and waves pulsate to the fast pace of the game's upbeat soundtrack. Enemies flit and dance around the screen. There is no level timer, and yet the player can't help but feel they're doing a disservice by not moving Kirby forward. Each world has its own distinct theme, which directly informs both the color palettes and level design. One world even features levels with a quite novel effect for its time, a simulated 3D tower. To further create a sense of space and depth, Kirby often rides atop a shooting star to creatively transition between screens. His occasional traversal from foreground to background platforms is reminiscent of the multi-depth platforming of 2.5D games that wouldn't really appear as a fully realized mechanic until many years later. Sprinkled throughout the game are bonus levels, each with a unique theme and visual styling to match. They serve not only as a respite from the normal platforming gameplay loop, but as a creative means to reuse art assets of various tiles and enemies. The flashy, casino-styled menus and graphics feed into the same energetic, fast-paced personality of the rest of the game, and add an increased weight to the player's minigame successes and failures. Kirby's Adventure was the outcome of a seasoned development team working effectively against the limitations of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and the resulting product possessed a degree of polish, visual style, and charm that most thought impossible to achieve. The transition into the Super Nintendo generation would bring with it new challenges to conquer, in addition to a higher ceiling for graphics, music, and processing, much like the NES before it.